no fucking clue the level of pain. Like that was like, you can't study that. You can't read that in a book. That is like an experience that you have. And then you're like, oh my God, this is what this
Yeah.
is.
4, 3, 2. Alrighty, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Grief Uncensored. I'm Yako.
And I'm Julia. Your grief is your own, and no one can tell you what to do with it. But we're glad that you're here and that you found us.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram, where we do a feature your loved one series where you can send in a caption and a photo of your loved one, and we post it in honor of them. We also have a Facebook page. You can go like us there, and a Facebook group that's open to all other grieving young adults, where we can all unleash our trauma and experiences in a group full of other people who can relate.
We also have a TikTok where we post all of our unhinged grief thoughts and a new Twitter. We also have a YouTube video version of our podcast for all of our visual people.
Yes, and the link to all of the things that we just mentioned is in our Instagram bio. All right, you guys. So, with all that said, this week we have a new guest, yet another guest, Hanna Normandeau. She's 26 years old and she has a counseling background, which gives her a very unique perspective because she's usually on the other side, usually helping other people through a hard time. But she's here to talk to us about compounded or cumulative grief. And she's going to talk about her experience having lost her dad, her grandfather, and her grandmother, all within a very short amount of time.
So, compounded grief, also known as cumulative grief, is a pile-on effect of grief or grief overload, also has been called bereavement overload. It means losing a loved one and then another loved one, or maybe a relationship and a job and a pet all around the same time. Any type of loss that causes grief, and there's several of them at the same time. It doesn't have to be a person, but this week we are talking about several people. Those are the types of grief that can cause bereavement overload, where you have so many losses at once. Nonetheless, no matter who or what it was, it is a big pile of grief and it's a lot to deal with.
Yes. So without further ado, you guys, let's welcome Hanna on and give her a little round of applause. Hey, welcome.
Hi, guys.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us your story.
Thank you so much for having me. Like honestly, you guys, your podcast was like so helpful for me. Like I found it right off and I've been like listening to it throughout, and I just feel like you've like been with me through the whole thing. So it's really cool to like come full circle and be on here now. So
that's really sweet. Yeah, we're honestly so glad that we were able to be a part of your process and your grieving journey, you know, and also you were witnessing ours too, because you know, this whole time we're kind of documenting our grief journey too, so you're just as much as a part of our journey too.
Yeah, that's really true. So as we said in the intro, Hanna is going to be talking to us about her experience with compounded grief. So honestly, Hanna, you can just take the floor and we'd love to hear about your loved ones and your story.
Yeah, so it's actually coming up on a year that my dad passed, October 22nd, so in a few weeks. So he actually passed away from COVID. Last fall he was exposed, and like actually a lot of my family was, but they were all fine. And he had it for like a week and really wasn't getting better. Things were getting worse. So they ended up bringing him to the hospital. And it was like kind of up and down while he was in the hospital. So he was there for like a little over a week, I think. But the whole time it was just like super stressful for my family and I, because like obviously with COVID, and if anyone, you know, has experienced this with someone like a family member having COVID, like that was serious enough to be admitted to the hospital, like you can't visit them, you can't really be in contact with them as much. So that was like really tough, is not being able to like see him or really talk to him even. And of course, like I was in North Carolina, I was in Raleigh. working down there. And like my parents and my younger brother are from upstate New York. So it was like, it's a 15-hour drive. It's not something that can just be like, okay, like I'll be right there. Usually it's like a flight or driving is like 2 days. So it was tough being away. I'm the oldest of 5, so all of my siblings and I were kind of like spread out across the country. Like I had a brother in Colorado. My other brother was like in New York, but still like 5 hours away. My sister was like a couple hours away. So during this whole week, we were all like, very much in contact, just trying to keep up to date with like how he was doing. But basically, like I said, things were going up and down, and we thought like, this is just kind of how it goes, but like he'll turn the corner, like things will be okay. It's just gonna be rough for a little bit, like a long recovery, probably, just like, we had heard so many people before, but he wasn't actually able to talk much either, which was really hard because he was, like in the lungs, and it was like he was just out of breath a lot and like had all these like machines hooked up. So I was able to only FaceTime with him like once during that whole time. So basically what happened was and this was such a weird thing, but like I'm so thankful like this happened, this random thing. So I fell asleep one night with my phone in my bed, which I never do. And I like must have rolled over in the middle of the night and like knocked off my bed, which woke me up. And I'm like a super deep sleeper. So like it would take like something like that, like a really loud noise to wake me up. And I was like all out of it. And I grabbed my phone and I noticed I had like a bunch of missed calls from my mom. So like didn't hear the calls, but thankfully like I did wake up to that, like it falling off my bed. So it's like 1 a.m, called my mom, and she's like, yeah, your dad's being like airlifted to another hospital, like a bigger hospital a couple hours away. Like something happened that they didn't tell me. I've got to call them back in a little bit when he gets there. And I was like, okay, do you want me to call like the boys, like my brothers, let them know so she could call other people? So we kind of did that. But not like anything like super serious. It was just kind of like, okay, like this is happening. And then she calls me back and is like panicked and is like, yeah, so they couldn't even airlift him, like that he can't, like they couldn't even get him like away. They can't stabilize him. He's coded 3 times. And my mom's a nurse, so she was like, this is not good. Like people don't come back from this. And I was kind of like, I don't know, I wanted to shock or something, but I was like, no, it's fine. Like I think, it like whatever, it'll be okay. So I'm like calling my brothers and like all this stuff. And yeah, I was living with my best friend and her boyfriend, like we're all friends at the time. And I like knock on the door and I'm like, I think my dad's dying. Like I was like, I don't know what's happening. So they came in my bedroom with me and like I'm on FaceTime. My mom's at the like they thankfully let her and my sister into the hospital, even though like COVID is like definitely an exception. So like I'm on FaceTime with like my aunt, or like it's like a whole mess, and like my brothers are like on the phone, and you're like we're in that like weird family room thing where they're like they just put you to wait while they like try to figure out what's going on. And they came out and they're like, yeah, we've tried for like 2 hours to like resuscitate. So they asked my mom like what she wanted to do. Like they're like, it's up to you. And she's like, I can't make that decision. Like, why are you putting that on me? And we're all like hysterical at this point. So so they tried again, but it was like it just wasn't. So
you were in North Carolina at this time and you're experiencing all of this on FaceTime. And then were any of your siblings able to be there at the same hospital as your dad and where your mom was?
My sister was, yeah.
Okay, your sister was.
Yeah, because she was the one that was like an hour and a half away. So like she was able to drive and get there, but the rest of us were too far. So
and you didn't expect this to happen.
No, I mean, if we had any indication, like we all would have like come home immediately, like if we had thought, something like this was going to happen. So basically like they brought us all into the room with him, and it was just like
To have to do this over FaceTime,
Yeah.
it's cruel.
Yeah, I literally put myself on mute and I was like screaming, like crying, screaming.
I
Like
know that one.
I think I blacked out, honestly. Like
Yep.
I didn't even like recognize myself. And I think I traumatized my friends because they were sitting on the floor with me as I'm like losing it.
Yeah.
I relate to that 100%.
Yep. It's awful. So that's how that all went down. And then it was, I don't know, I would think I was like in shock for sure. And I immediately like packed a bag. It was a Friday morning, packed a bag, and I just started driving. Like I just was like, I need to be home like now. Which
Shit.
looking back, I was like, I don't know if I should have like been
Just-
driving by myself in that state, but
Right.
it was just kind of like a one-track
No,
mind.
Yeah, it was like a, I forget what I was gonna say, but I mean, it was just like a decision that you made from like your, like, it was just like a panic and go. Like it wasn't no thoughts, you just do it because that's what you think you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, like I think I was just like going through the motions, like I wasn't like really present. So
Yeah.
So if your mom was on FaceTime with you, were your brothers able to be on FaceTime too?
no, so
So
they
they-
don't have iPhones, so they were like they were on a call. Like
Okay.
so my aunt had one of them on the phone, another aunt had another one on the phone.
Oh my
So
God.
my dad's two of his sisters were able to be at the hospital as well.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I was
Holy shit.
So they let people in the room with him at the end.
yeah, yep. So they took him off. I mean, he was like intubated and like it was like honestly it was like a disaster
Yeah,
in the
that's
room
traumatic.
because
Yeah.
so
It's
they had
not
like
like not in the movies where you're holding their hand, like you see their face and you're like, bye, dad. It's like,
No, it's like all these
way. Yeah.
heavy machinery, like of them trying to like resuscitate your dad. Also, when you said like it's up to your mom, like what does that even mean? Like to keep trying or to like
yeah.
put him
I
on,
guess they were trying to ask her
like
what the next move is, like,
yeah, that's so fucked up.
So yeah, they asked her and then they were like, at this point, even if we keep trying, like
Why are you even asking? Like
he's been without oxygen to his brain for so long. Like if they even are able to like get something back, like he's probably brain dead.
oh my God,
And so
horrible.
I know.
that's such a horrible statement. And a lot of just the recurring theme with like the stories that I hear about like a loss in a medical field is like such a bad
Yeah, they're never good.
communication from like
Uh-huh.
the medical side to the patients. Like there's always such a bad
Big disconnect there.
yeah, just the worst ways to say things and ask. And the timing of that, like what the fuck? I almost want to punch that guy in the face.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
Don't
we were all in
assume that the
shock.
doctor was male Yaka.
Yeah.
Actually, it was a female.
Oh my God. All right. Well, that's why you don't assume.
But yeah, still the point stands. Delivery was not good.
Yeah.
Of that. So yeah, that was really traumatic. And like that was like the first loss I had ever experienced. Like I've, like all my grandparents at that point were still alive. Like literally I had never experienced any loss. So that was the first one. And it was like super traumatic, unexpected. And I was like, what the fuck?
And also, not to mention, if all your grandparents are still alive, that means that they lost their child before they passed. And that's like such a heartbreak.
Inhumane.
Yeah. No.
It's like the one thing that you shouldn't have to endure is watching your child.
Yeah. Having to bury your own child is just not something that's not supposed to be the path of human nature.
No, it's not supposed to be the circle of life.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Yeah, that was happened with my dad. And so his parents were both 90 at the time. He was the youngest. He was like in his 50s. So he passed in October. And basically, I mean, after that, they were both like, pretty good health. They were living on their own. But after that, they both went completely downhill, like immediately, which obviously, I don't know how you're 90 years old, you just lose like your baby,
Yeah.
he was like the youngest. And so yeah, they're my grandparents, but I call them Nani and Papa. It's like I don't know, that's just what we do. But so my Papa ended up passing away like 6 months after. So it was like my dad, and then not a lot of time, and then my Papa, and then 2 months after him, my Nani. So
Oh my God.
within like an 8-month period, it was like 3 major losses.
Mhm.
And it was all my dad's family. Like it was very
Yeah.
concentrated on like one side. So
Yeah.
it felt like even more, like it just layers on it. And it is weird because like having my dad as my first like loss that I've experienced was like super traumatic and like unexpected. He was young, like, yeah, like this is not supposed to happen, right? But then with my grandparents, his parents, it was like, they were 90. They both passed very peacefully in their own homes. They had their family surrounding them. It was like, very, I don't know. I mean, it's still obviously sad when anyone dies, but it was a very different experience
Right.
of death. So
When you have people pass who are 90, it's like feels more like a natural ending of the life cycle. So it's like not surrounded with all of these other, trauma and secondary losses, like how it is to lose someone way too young.
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely like a different experience, but I also like I was gone for all of it. I was in Raleigh for like my dad and when my papa passed, and then actually my nanny passed like a few months ago. I was out in Denver and I was supposed to be there. I went like on a road trip with a friend out there. They were moving out there and I was supposed to be there for like a week. And like a few days into me being there, she passed away. So I
Oh
flew
my
back
God.
early. And so it was a whole thing. But yeah, I definitely felt like guilty not being there for literally all of it.
Mhm.
Because part of it too is like, so my brother ended up actually moving back after my dad passed, so he was able to be there for my grandparents and like be there for the family and everything.
Mhm.
And I just couldn't do that with my job, so
Mhm.
I stayed in Raleigh, and
Yeah.
all the loss kept coming, so it like
Yeah.
did not stop.
Yeah. And the guilt just keeps piling on because you're kind of like, why didn't I just go home?
Yeah.
After each time, you're like, why didn't I just go home? But at the same time, like you said, like you have other responsibilities, including your job, and that is not your fault, and that is really unfortunate the way everything went down. But I just wanted to say that because it is really not your fault. It's so out of your control.
Yeah. How did you like deal with the feelings of like overwhelm when like, like you said, you were still working in Raleigh? I don't know, I guess this is a loaded question, but like you go back to work after your loss of your dad, and then the losses just keep coming as time goes on. How did you react to all these things? Like, how did it look like in your daily life?
So like after my dad passed, I did take 2 weeks. I was my first year at that job, so I had no time built up. I was at a school in the South. They don't really have like unions for their teachers and their staff. So like the time off was just like not great. So I ended up taking just a bunch of like unpaid days because it was like that loss and then my papa and my not like it all just like added up, and it was like at that point. But I think like knowing from my background, I was like a little more aware of like, okay, this is what it might be like there's gonna be waves, there's gonna be like the initial shock and the denial, like it's gonna kind of cushion some of that for you initially when there's like all this stuff to do when someone dies.
Yep.
Right.
Like no one talks about like there's just so much you have to take care of.
Yeah. And you like kind of dissociate while you're handling all that shit, because how else are you supposed to like fucking handle their closing their bank accounts and going through all their shit and stuff like that,
Yeah.
facing these family members and talking to them. It's like you really have to dissociate, or else it's like
Yeah.
impossible to survive.
Honestly, yeah. So there was like some of that. And then it was funny because like I knew like all like, I studied it in college and I've supported students through that.
Mhm.
Not like at a like an intense level, like because usually young students would lose like a grandparent or
Right.
like an aunt. Like I hadn't really helped students through like major direct loss, like a parent or like a sibling or something. But I did know like, just some of the things you would go through generally. And it's funny because I was like, oh, like I'm kind of like handling this okay. Then skip ahead to months later, and I'm like, oh, I was in denial. Like I was in shock.
Yeah.
Like that's what that was.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So overall, do you think your background in counseling like did prepare you in a way or not really overall? Like, was grief what you thought it was before you experienced it? Did it live up to everything that you learned, or was it completely different than what you thought?
That's a good question. And yes and no. So, like I feel like I had some idea. No fucking clue the level of pain. Like that was like you can't study that. You can't read that in a book. That is like an experience that you have and then you're like, "Oh my God, this is what this
Yeah.
is." So yes and no. Like I kind of knew generally, but like my siblings and I talked about like we just had no idea. We were like, we had never had a loss like this ever. And looking back on it too, I'm like, oh my God, like I did not have the appropriate response to some people in my life that went
Oh
through
my
this.
God. Yeah. I completely relate to that. Like I just look back at so many people that I've met and encountered and was friends with that have had a significant loss. And like, there's just things I did that I really regret doing, like not checking in on them as much as like, because as someone who needs someone to check in on, like now I know that that's something that needs to be happening all the time. And like, doesn't matter how much past time has passed, it's always nice to check in. And yeah, like just I don't know, it's not just about showing up for the funeral is all I can say.
Yeah, you just don't know until you've experienced it yourself.
And
Yeah,
it's
you can't even try to understand. It's
You
like
just don't know that level of pain yet. You don't know that level of like isolation and sorrow.
yeah, and it's like the worst kind of pain too, because there's really no solution to this pain. And that's what makes this pain so much worse, because you just are like have to feel it. And there's literally no comfort because you're just like, this is forever, which is really scary and daunting at first. But I mean, as time goes on, you kind of learn to manage it. But it's definitely like intense pain. And like we kind of talked about last episode, like hopelessness, because you're like, is this ever going to go away? This feeling? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's real. Like that is so real. And I'll say, like, I don't know if I answered the question fully because it was like yes and no, but I think the awareness of like, okay, this is what you might go through these different kind of like stages. It might hit you all of a sudden. You might not feel like yourself, like those kinds of things. I think I was like, first of all, I was fine with it. I'm like pretty comfortable with my emotions. I'm like, I don't know. I was like, okay, you need to like feel this. You need to experience it. You cannot put this off. You can't like, just stay to yourself and not talk about it. Like you got to do what's best for you. So if I was angry, I'd be like super angry and I was fine. Like, so I think it helped that I like had that awareness and like I kind of didn't view it as like these are all bad emotions or these are like negative experiences. It was more like, okay, accepting and like you need to go through this because that's how it works.
Right.
Like you can't, like spiritual bypassing, you can't like bypass grief because it's still going to be there. So
yeah. Because of all these losses happening so close together, were you kind of, or are you able to compartmentalize each individual loss and kind of separate them in your brain and like grieve the losses individually?
So with that, I think it was, yes, some compartmentalizing. And because they were so close to each other, I think it was a lot of like comparing like my dad's loss versus like my papa versus my nanny. Cause like, even though they're both my grandparents, like I did have a different relationship with both of them. Like I was a lot closer with my nanny, and not in a bad way towards my papa, but that's just kind of how it was. So I definitely felt guilty if I was kind of like sad over one and grieving one, and then if I was thinking about my nanny, but then I wasn't thinking about my dad, I wasn't thinking about my papa. And it was kind of like a juggling act.
Yeah.
Which, yeah,
that's
normal.
I think that's normal, and I hear that often too. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, our grief reflects the relationship that we had with that person while they were here. So of course they're all going to look differently, but it is natural to feel guilty for, when you're comparing how you feel about each individual one, and if they weren't so compounded, you probably wouldn't have been comparing them like that in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Like that directly.
Yeah.
Because, so it was some of that, but then it was, I think a lot of it too was like, because the loss, like I said, was the circumstances of their death are very different. So even that was like something that like I felt, I had a lot more strong feelings about my dad's passing because just of like how traumatic it was and like all of that. But I think it actually, like having, like we talked about earlier, like the natural progression of things is like, your grandparents are usually the first loss you experience, and then like kind of outer people, and then maybe your parents when they're older, like, so to have my first loss experience be my dad, like someone so close, he was young and all this stuff, I think it actually like skewed my perspective on loss in general. I think now any other loss that happens in my life is just going to be like not even
incomparable to the pain that you felt with your dad. I was also thinking that question, but I didn't want to say it because it kind of sounds like I don't know. I was trying to think of like the right wording to ask that kind of question, where it's like, obviously your first loss being your dad is probably the most significant loss, other than maybe losing like your other direct family members, and then experiencing your grandparents who were kind of already at that age and stuff. So it's like right directly in your face, like the levels. And it's like, I understand that guilt where you're like, oh, but it doesn't mean that you don't love them as much or they don't mean as much to you, but that's your fucking dad, and that in the way that it happened, the way that it was sudden, unexpected, and he was so young, like it's just, I mean, it's completely natural, I think, to feel that way. But I also completely understand that like guilt that you're talking about, and that having that so in front of your face. And also I completely relate too, because having experienced this loss, I feel like I always say about like any bad thing that happens in my life, just like anything bad, I'm like, oh, this is nothing compared to what I experienced, Yeah,
I agree. I've had that same exact thought, actually. When you said that, I was like, yep, I literally have had that same thought because everything that I went through with the loss of my mom, I don't think that any other pain will be more than the pain that I endured from the loss of her. Like, I don't, I hope nothing like that ever happens again. I hope I don't have to endure pain like that ever again. But I know that this couldn't be anything worse than that. At least I don't want to believe that there could be anything worse than that.
Yeah. And if there is, fuck.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I hear stories of like horrible things happening back to like trauma back to back. Like, and it's just like, why the fuck did these things happen? Like two horrible fucking things back to back. I mean, it's like terrifying to think that that shit happens in life.
Yeah. And then you also, it's so bad to say, but this like resentment towards other people who like haven't experienced one loss in the same time you're experiencing 3 losses. You're like, why the fuck am I experiencing all of this right now when this bitch over here?
I get so fucking mad when I see any like happy older woman with like her older daughter, like her adult daughter. I am like, I would say irrationally mad, but it is rational in my mind. But like to other people, probably like if I, like it's irrational, but it is rational to me because I'm like, it's just not fair. Like, I don't understand. Like, I see these people and I'm like, why do they get to be, but not like, and like the same thing goes like for people who are like my age and they have their parents and their grandparents. And I'm just like, I have not had grandparents since I was like 10. Like, and then I don't have a mom now and I'm 23. Like, how is this fair? How does this make sense? Why is this the cards that I got dealt?
Exactly. Oh yeah, but I was gonna say something else. Oh yeah, so what I was gonna say about the comparison thing is that I think like obviously with the time frame that everything happened is like it's like right in your face. So obviously you're gonna compare, but I think at any point in your life when you experience any other loss, you're gonna fucking compare, and that's like an inevitable, and that's just like how it's gonna go. And there's no, it's like I hate to say it, but it's just gonna happen,
Yeah, but that is like the shitty part about grief that like nobody really wants to admit because it feels bad. It doesn't feel right to like put one person over another, but that's just kind of like the reality of the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, definitely understandable.
And like with my situation too, it was like my dad and then his dad, then his mom. It was like hard because I felt like I was losing more of him with each loss. Like
yeah.
I was like, damn, like these are the other people
Mm-hmm.
in my life that are like the closest to him. This is all I have left of him.
Damn.
And like now they're gone too. Like it just felt like an even bigger hole
Right.
in my life.
Just kept getting torn open.
Yeah. Along the lines of being torn open, like what after the first loss, did you feel like you had enough time to like process it before another loss happened, or were you feeling like did you feel like kind of like damn I have to start this whole thing again, or were you already just kind of in a state of shock and it just piled onto that?
So it had been 6 months when my papa died, so I think I was definitely out of the shock stage at that point. But I definitely like wasn't fully processed. Like I still am not. Like I was thinking about like coming on here earlier and like talking about this and like like waves still hit me, like things still surprise me about my grief. So definitely not like at a good place. And then what even furthered it was like the funerals for me, like after my dad, were like re-traumatizing and like re-triggering for all of us, like my siblings and my mom. So
and I bet you felt guilty because you're like thinking of your dad's funeral while you're at your grandparents' funeral.
Yeah. So it's like a weird thing, like to balance in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's all. Yeah, like Julia said, valid as fuck. And I mean, there's just that's probably the only way that I would have been doing it too, is thinking about my dad the whole time because,
Yeah, it was pretty much just like flashbacks to like that day. And I think, I don't know, maybe it was even worse. I'm not really sure because like my dad's funeral, I think I was still like pretty much in shock and like, I don't know, I felt like I had like no emotions. Like I was like a shell of a person, like really numb. But then by the time like my Nine Papa's funerals came around, I was like past that point, like the little like buffer you kind of get with that. And it was like super raw. And I was like, oh, this is like really happening.
Yeah. It's so weird to like feel that you're actually in that position, like in that funeral. When you have that realization moment where you're like, wow, I'm actually at this fucking person's funeral right now, stepping outside of like that dissociation.
Yeah. It's weird because at my mom's funeral, like I knew where I was and what I was there for because I didn't want to get out and I was crying, like, literally freaking out in the car right there. But still, you don't believe that it's happening. Like, damn well what's happening, but you still can't even believe it at the same time.
Yeah. But anyway, back to you. I want to talk about, did your siblings grieve differently? How different did your grief look compared to theirs? And that
very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of five, so like the four oldest of us are like all in our 20s. Like I'm 26. My brothers are like in between, and then my sister is 21, 22.
Mhm.
And then my youngest brother, he was a surprise. He's 13. So
Oh.
I know. It's like
Dang.
the saddest part of all of this.
Yeah.
So I was super vocal about my grief. I was very like open about it, honest, vulnerable, like, and I was like probably the only one that was like really in like anger. Like I was so angry for so long. Like that was like the main thing I was tapped into. And,
Same.
and yeah, I mean, yeah. But anyway, so my siblings, like some of them just like don't talk about it, which is like really hard for me because I'm the kind of person like, let's talk about it. Let's like feel,
Yeah,
you
you're a
know.
counselor. Of course you are.
Yeah, it's like the counselor me. I'm like, all right, let's just like work through this. And um yeah, so that was hard. And then obviously with my youngest brother, it was like you kind of have to be careful with that just because like with him at least I just like want to meet him where he was at. So I didn't like push anything with
Yeah.
him. But yeah, I definitely was like the most outspoken, and I would like, you know, if I was like having a moment, I'd have a moment and like it was fine.
Yeah.
But I had to, and this isn't necessarily like just my siblings, but like my mom too. I had to have like very frank conversations with some people in my life that were like, look, if this is what like I'm sharing or like I'm having a moment, like I need you to just be there. Like
Yeah.
this is how I'm grieving. It's like, and I have to like advocate like for myself and be like, this is natural, like this is normal.
Yeah.
You know, like
Totally.
like I can't like you can't say things to me that are trying to make me feel better. Like nothing's made me feel better. Like you cannot say anything that will make this better. You can't fix it. Like don't try that. It's just gonna piss me off.
Yeah.
Like I just need you to be there and kind of validate and just kind of witness, you know, just be there
Of
during
course.
this.
Did you
So-
have to like explain that kind of stuff to your friends too? Especially like the friend that you said who witnessed like the phone call and everything, like sounded like she and her boyfriend were there, like they're there, you know?
No, she was amazing. She's always been like solid throughout. Yeah, I've never had to like have that kind of conversation with her. But other friends I've had to.
Yeah.
Um,
And then
my
other people
mom.
you like don't even want to exert that energy for, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you had a friend like that. That sounds really
Yeah.
amazing.
I was just gonna say that that person sounds really special, and I'm glad they're in your life and
She
holding it
actually
down.
like I was so I told her I was gonna be on this. I didn't tell like anybody. I told like one person, like her and another friend. And so I told them I was gonna be on this podcast, and she started listening to your podcast.
Oh
Like,
my god.
yeah.
That's
She's
really
like,
sweet.
Oh my God.
she's like, she does pottery. She's like, I was in my studio and I listened to the first 4 episodes and I was crying.
Oh,
I love it when people who aren't grieving listen, because that like adds a whole nother level of like power to the podcast, because I'm like, wow, like we are actually grief educators now. Not only are we just like relating to people, we're like actually trying to educate people too. Because
yeah.
sometimes in our episodes we talk to people too. Like we kind of like change
The perspective.
like,
Yeah. Sometimes we're
yeah,
talking
and
to
we're
the
like,
griever, and sometimes we're talking
yeah.
to the supporter of the griever.
Yeah, so I'm glad
Right.
that supporters of the griever actually are listening.
Yeah, that's really, really meaningful. And like I'm really glad that she's like taking the time to like listen, because that's also, I mean, she already knows because you're so close to her what the effects of like grief can look like and how we grieving people think and stuff like that. But for people who don't have anyone close to them, like it's such a foreign space, you know? So lots to be learned there.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing to like talk about it from a distance, is like kind of like an academic or like a research thing. Like this is what grief is and these are the stages. But to listen to like your stories and like how real and just like honest you guys are, I think that gives so much insight into like how intense it is and like the actual experience of grief. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
Sometimes
yeah.
like when I listen back, especially to the first episode where we're just talking about what happened, like I will be explaining something, and to me, like the memory is vivid in my head, right? Like I remember exactly how it felt, but I will just like explain it as, you know, whatever. I'll just use a couple adjectives for it, but I'm like, this still doesn't encompass like how horrible it was. Like this doesn't encompass like my world spinning and me like screaming bloody murder in front of my friend's house, and like this like nothing can encompass it. And like sometimes it's like frustrating because I'm like, did I explain it good enough? Because like
Yeah.
it's not just pain, like it is so much more. But I mean, again, like we said, like you don't know till you really know. So for now, all I have is adjectives because there was no documentary camera next to me.
Imagine.
Although I have seen some shows and movies where they have done those like pretty well, and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, I can't look at this right now.
Yeah.
But what are some things that possibly gave relief to you in these times, or some ways that you've learned to cope, or just anything that kind of relieved all your grief symptoms, your grief, your anger, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll give you the counselor answer, and then I'll give you what I actually did.
Perfect.
So, because they're very different.
Yeah.
And even, you know, like even being a counselor, being exposed to this stuff, like we've talked about, you've no idea until you go through it and how you're actually going to react and how you're actually going to cope. So I would say a huge thing from a counseling standpoint, and just like as a human, is to be like, you know, okay with your emotions, be okay with experiencing them, know that they're not bad, they're normal. There's no rules to grief, which I feel like I'm just like saying everything that you guys always talk about, but just to reiterate, like
I'm glad
in
we're
case
doing
this
it
is a-
right then, because you're a counselor.
Yeah, hell yeah.
yeah, I mean, there are no rules to grief. It's, you know, it's do what's best for you. Self-care is huge. If any time in your life you should prioritize it, it is now and for however long you need to. I mean, some things I've done with my students, I guess I can share, are like memory books, or making something, creating something, like either with your hands or like doing something like that that's like a physical act, and also like a visual thing that you can look back on, I think can be helpful for a lot of people. Because like we talked about earlier, it's really hard to put into words
Yeah.
like the experience. So sometimes that's a way for people to process a little more and make meaning out of it. And, you know, it's
Totally.
usually like a overall positive experience for people, even if, you know, it's really sad doing
Yeah.
it. But yeah, so one last thing I would add to that is, you know, whatever you're doing to honor your person, again, no rules. It's just kind of like whatever feels right. And it can be like the smallest thing. You can like kind of make little rituals, or you can make the smallest thing something special and meaningful. Like it doesn't have to be a big thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
and
like
doing things they enjoyed. That's like
Totally.
True. For example, one of the guests we had, Tessa, she like goes to get Dairy Queen to get chocolate milkshakes, and it's like a really small thing, but that's like her way to feel connected to her dad because her dad loved them. So it's something small like that, you know. It doesn't have to be like a big move where you have to like make a whole day out of it or something.
exactly.
But what's
me,
your
it's like-
response? I want to know what was your response?
Oh yeah, was that
after
your
counseling?
okay? That was your counselor response.
Okay,
What's
and
your
something
response?
that's both like counselor and my response is just talking about my dad like all the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Just
Totally.
whenever, like when people ask me about him, that's like my favorite thing, because I'm like, oh my God, I get to talk about him. And it's like, you know, like that's the only thing we have now
Yeah.
True.
is, so yeah, anytime it's like even the smallest things, it's like, oh my God, that was his favorite song. Like my dad loved this song. And like a lot of times I'll just say it like he's still alive, like, oh my God, my dad loves the song, or like
Yeah.
he, you know, like whatever. That's just like a random example. But
Do you like experience people getting kind of weird after you say something like that? Like, oh my dad loved this or something like that.
oh yeah, people get like super uncomfortable and they don't know how to react.
They're
But
like,
I do not care. I'm just like, that's
That's
not
good.
my
Don't let it stop you.
Yeah, no, definitely do not let it stop you. It does affect me though. For me, like when that happens to me, I'm just like, oh my God, this is
Don't let
like
it
so
stop you.
awkward.
Not me.
I mean, I just like think, this should be talked about more and it should be normalized because everyone goes through it. Like, I don't understand how we're not just talking about this all the time.
I
Like,
know, right?
Right.
That is why we started this podcast.
exactly.
I totally agree with you. I mean, everything that we do in the name of this podcast is to literally normalize all of this. And I don't want to feel weird about being like, oh my God, like my mom loved this without people being like, oh, she just mentioned her
And you know
mom.
what? That kind of goes into like literally telling people I have a grief podcast. I kind of feel like I always kind of feel like I don't know how they're gonna react to this. Whenever I'm like, I have
It's
a
so true.
podcast, they're like, what's it about? And I'm like, it's about grief. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because I lost my dad. It's always like so uncomfortable. I don't know, but we need to like move past that feeling because that's
for sure
what we need to get at.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time when I tell people I have a grief podcast, I'm like, all right, like I'm going straight into it. Like, I have a grief podcast, and then depending on like, some people have been like, oh, and then that's it, and then some people are like, oh my God, like that's so cool. Then they ask me about it.
Yeah,
and
most
like, okay.
people are the alter where they're like, that's really cool and blah blah blah,
Yeah,
whether they mean it or not.
I feel like it's like 50-50 for me at least.
Yeah,
I would say more like 50-50 for me too. Whenever I like have mentioned him or like talk about him, it's like it goes either way.
That's true. Yeah, it's so
once
it's
one of my
honestly
friends
laughable.
even were like, I don't even know how to like respond to that. I'm like, okay, fuck you.
That's so rude.
Because I think it was like more because it was like no, actually not think about it. I think I was making more of like a dead mom joke.
Oh.
So I think that's more okay. But still, I was like, let me make my fucking dead mom joke. Like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, but it's like, am I allowed to laugh? Like, I didn't earn the right to laugh at this joke.
You're right.
And then if they laugh a little too hard, you're like, why'd you laugh so hard?
I'm like, all right, hold on, stop laughing. That joke wasn't for you.
But anyway, yeah, let's talk about what you do versus your counselor answer.
So yeah, a lot of what I did, I would not recommend to my students, but I think it's just the reality of like how to get through shit like this. So a lot of dissociating, a lot of like doom scrolling. TikTok was like my best friend, like literally after work, immediately in bed, TikTok, like, and redo the next day. Like that was,
and
like,
they would be like, are you sure those TikToks that are like, are you sure you're spending enough time doing other things
for way too long now? And I'm like, okay.
I'm like, no, it's just not enough yet. I'm gonna keep I don't feel better yet, so I'm gonna keep doing it.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of that in the beginning, just like numbing and distracting. Then after my papa died, like it kind of like snapped something in me. I don't know what happened, but I went on like a little bit of an eat, pray, love situation. Where I had like this whirlwind relationship. It was like this person was moving and I was like, I don't care. We'll just make the most of it in like these 2 months. And I went to like 6 concerts in like a month and a half. I was just like always doing something. I was like going out all the time, which is not like, I'm like an introvert. Like that's not me.
Wow.
I was
so interesting.
Like, I never, I was like trying different like substances. Like I never tried for nothing like crazy, but like did shrooms.
Yeah, me too.
No, it was legal. I was in Denver, so it was legal.
Okay, let's
disclaimer. She was in a legal state, guys. You can't say anything.
I was like trying to like feel something, anything, just like have all these crazy like experiences. And then it all kind of crashed after my nanny died, and I came back home, and it was just like, holy shit. And now I'm in that part where like I had the craziness and I'm just kind of like trying to level back out.
So you're in the leveling out stage now.
Yeah. Trying to actually focus on it and not avoid it and not do all this stuff to like run from it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely feel something along similar too. Like the first stage for me was more like just dissociation and sadness.
Dissociation should be a stage of grief. Like,
Yeah,
how is it not?
right. It was like numbness, but then if I'm not numb, I'm so sad.
Yeah.
But I also felt like I felt a lot of derealization, like heavy. Like I just felt like I was in a movie, but it wasn't like I wasn't even there. Like I was watching it all occur. It just was like the worst movie ever. And I was like, when is this movie gonna end?
Because I really relate to what you were saying, Hannah, about like, especially in the beginning where you just get what you need to get done, get home from school or work, and then go sit on TikTok. And like, I was definitely doing the same thing, but it really took me a long time to pull myself out of that like routine, because I'm like, okay, actually, I need to get off TikTok and deal with my life right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for you, you went into the Eat, Pray, Love. For me, what did I do? I guess I started this podcast. But like everything else, I still go on TikTok. You know, like it's a way. It's a circular like.
It's a balance. You're
Yeah.
finding a balance between doing this podcast and going on TikTok.
Yeah, I will go on TikTok right after we film this.
Exactly.
Honestly, that's
we will
fine.
all be
Yeah.
on TikTok.
But yeah,
It's weird though. I just realized as I was sharing this with you guys, there's like literally each kind of like different stage was like in between each death. It was like my dad's death. This was like what I did. Then my papa died. And like I did the crazy whatever, everything. And then my nanny died. And now it's just kind of like a balance and like actually dealing with it.
yeah.
Wow.
So
That's
that like
wow.
just clicked, which I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, that timeline is really specific.
Update us on that one.
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
really interesting. I cannot think of words today.
I know.
What is the word
Insight?
for?
I literally
Yeah.
such a hard time, and I feel like I'm freaking always talking over you, Julia.
We always talk over. We honestly both do. It's so bad.
It's so bad. You know, I've been editing out the parts where I talk over you, so there's like that's why it's also not doing that anymore.
Oh, really? I actually kind of noticed that because I was like, it sounds like her mic is off.
Yeah, if you watch the YouTube videos, there's parts where I'm like, but there's like
I really want to watch that now. I want to see that. That's really funny.
no, I revealed too much. But okay,
Yeah.
I also want to ask you
Yeah.
one more thing, which is what would you want people to like know about compounded grief and cumulative grief? Is there any like stigmas that you want to break down? What are some things that you want to like the people to know?
Yeah. Final takeaways about compounded grief. We're like myths to bust.
I didn't know really anything before this about like what it would be, or to be honest, I don't know a lot of people who have had multiple losses.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, like, I guess the biggest takeaways are like, try not to feel guilty about like the comparisons. I know that's like basically what I've been talking about. I was like, I was feeling guilty and it was really shitty. But, you know, at the same time, I was like, okay, I understand this is not my fault. I didn't choose any of this. This is what happened. It's not like I love them any less. It's just, that's how dynamics are. And that's just what it is. And to be like gentle with yourself, like be aware of like, okay, if you're having multiple losses in a very short period, like double down on the self-care. Be aware that it might be triggering to go through that. A lot of like the same, like the funeral and all of that. Support is huge, especially when you're experiencing multiple losses. It's like very overwhelming to the system. So definitely reach out for support. And in terms of myths, like grief is grief, whether it's one loss, two loss, 3, 4, 5, like it's all grief, and it can be look differently in different stages, but it's all like the same kind of thing that you have to go through and experience. So that's not a very concise takeaway, but that's
I thought that was
I thought that was very concise.
No, that was really good.
Actually, my second to last question, I was just reminded, did you see your own therapist as a counselor? Like, did you seek help from someone else, or did you kind of just look inward?
Oh no, I'm like fully supportive. Like everyone should be in counseling. It's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't feel like it's never really harmful. If anything, it's like a support. And so after my dad died, I did reach out like maybe a month or two later. Just because I knew, I'm like, this is a lot. I've never experienced this kind of pain and all of it before. So even before kind of like the like shock wore off, I was already like preemptively like, okay, I'm gonna probably need this support. And I'm very open about it. Like pretty much everyone in my life knows like I'm seeing a counselor
Yeah.
for the multiple losses
Yeah.
that just kept happening.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I always have to add something about therapy in every single episode, I feel like.
Love it.
But yes, go to therapy, everyone. We are always saying just seek it out, seek help, at least try it out.
Yeah, just try it.
There's no harm in it.
And I know it can be hard to like find
Yeah.
someone that,
And also
you know.
affordability is a thing too.
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
it's not affordable for a lot of people.
Mhm.
But
A
you
lot-
know, we always like to say, like, if you're a student too, there's resources you can take advantage of while you're a student. Maybe your job offers healthcare. I don't know if that's really covered, but just try to find out, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people do sliding scales.
What is
So
that?
if a sliding scale.
Mhm.
So like if you don't have insurance coverage, or like if you do have insurance but that like specific therapist doesn't take it, or there's different circumstances for that. But so say they through your insurance, they would charge your insurance like $100 for like the hour.
Oh.
They would do a sliding scale for you, and you would have to pay out of pocket. Like your insurance isn't going to cover it, but it would be a reduced rate. So like half the price. So like 40 or 50. So
Oh my God, how have I
That's
never
really
heard of that?
nice. Yeah.
yeah. So
And then
Just-
also there's
And all these apps that are coming out lately,
yeah, I was
like
just gonna say like
Mhm.
BetterHelp, Talk, or whatever.
Cerebral.
Yeah.
There's another Talkspace. Yeah, all
Talkspace.
those. Okay, I think it's time for our final question. Finally, it is your turn to just dive into all things your dad, your grandma, your grandpa, and just tell us all about them and who they were, what they loved to do, everything.
this is my favorite part because I love talking about them.
Us too.
Yeah, so they were all French. That's kind of like maybe like a special thing about them. My nanny and papa were born in Canada, so they're like dual citizens. And so my dad and them were all bilingual. They did not teach me, which I'm bummed about. But it was really cool, like growing up and going to family reunions, and they would like all be speaking French, and like I'd ask my dad stuff all the time, like, how do you say this and how do you say that? That was really cool. We had a camp in Canada. My papa like built it back in the 50s. It was right in the lake, and we literally spent like every summer there. My dad grew up there like during the summer. It was his absolute favorite place on this planet. Like that was his space. He loved the water. He loved boating. Like that was his thing. Like he always said if he had like could go back and like pick another career, he would try to like open his own marina and like do that kind of thing.
God, that's
and
so fun.
yeah, so and he actually was like, so he was 2 years away from retirement, and he was going to buy like a kind of like a bigger like houseboat thing and like kind of sail down the East Coast and like hit North Carolina where I was, and like other parts of Florida. And like he was just kind of like an adventurous guy, like doing stuff like that. But yeah, that like my nanny and papa, they were all super close. That was their baby. But yeah, they were it's like I love talking about it, but I get emotional.
Of course.
Yeah, we were all super close, and I miss them a lot. So
Thank you so much for sharing. That was really beautiful. And your dad just seems like so awesome. And we always say like we wish we could get to like fucking meet, you know.
I know. After every time I hear someone talk about their loved one that they lost, I'm like, why couldn't like all of our parents meet? Like this sucks. Like they all seem so amazing. Like it just reminds you of the reality of it.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective about everything. And you said everything so well. You were so well spoken. And yeah, it just meant a lot to have you on. So thank you so much for taking your time and being with us today.
Thank you guys so much. Literally, you were like the people that like I feel like I like went through with from the beginning. So like I said, it's like so cool to be here, and I appreciate this opportunity so much to be able to share about my family and my experience. So thank you guys.
Of course.
Of course. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week.